You're listening to Part 7 of The Trickster, read by author Jason Lee Willis. Chapter 60, Pewabic Means Clay. Blue Knife River, June 14th, 1986. For the trick to work, Levi needed to battle the Wintermaker one-on-one. Neither his parents nor the Asante Lodge knew anything about his plan, and the only one who came with him was the intended sacrificial lamb, his brother Joey. So Levi snuck out of the house early on Saturday morning, transported Lily's canoe in the old truck, and launched onto the Blue Knife River near Nimrod. "What's the word again?" Joey asked after several prolonged moments of silence. "What word?" Levi clarified, keeping the old birch bark canoe away from the rocks protruding from the riverbed. "The word that I'm supposed to be looking for." "Vitriol?" "No, the other word. The word that Grandma Lily used to call me. My Indian name." "Pewabic." And Joey repeated it. Pewabic. Pewabic with a B. Pewabic. Why did she call me that again? Win or lose, Joey would be chosen by the Manitou as the Omadai. In his little body flowed both Ouijigan and Eos blood. If the Manitou didn't enjoy the plump little morsels set in front of him, it would next turn to Lacey Morrison, whose blood was also ancient and familiar. Levi grit his teeth, resolute to close the loop, before revealing his trick. "Lily had a dream about you, but Mom wouldn't listen to her, which is why she named you Joseph instead." "How am I supposed to know what this clay looks like?" "It'll be wet and grainy, like sand or mud. Plus, it'll be strangely colored, either blue or green. Didn't you ever mold things with clay in kindergarten?" "I use Play-Doh." "Well, just keep your eyes open, okay? Gigi Lily said you'd be the only one able to find it." "What if I don't find it?" "You have to find it," Levi answered silently. "The future is the past, Joey. If you don't find it, then I don't call it to Grandma Lily when she was young. And if I don't call it to Grandma Lily when she was young, then she doesn't find the water drum. And if she doesn't find the water drum, then she can't save Jean Guerin, our great-grandfather. But I am here. The loop is closing." "You'll find it, Joey. I guarantee it." For a few minutes, Joey stayed quiet, allowing Levi to be alone with his thoughts. 40 feet below the top of the wooded ridge, Levi could see burst drain pipes, a staircase, and an assortment of modern refuse tucked along the roots of the tree. He was getting closer. "Why didn't you go to her funeral if you loved her so much?" Joey finally asked. Levi didn't answer. "Why aren't you talking to me? Are you sad she's dead or something?" "I suppose I am, Joey, but Gigi Lily lived to be 103 years old, so it's hard to be too sad for someone who lives such a long life. I hope I can live to be that old. Instead, I'll be dead by this afternoon, or at least mostly dead." "I wouldn't want to be that old. Who was that really old Indian at the funeral?" "I don't know, Joey. I wasn't there." "He was really, really old. I don't even know if he could see, and he was all hunched over, and his face was really wrinkled and gross. Really gross." "That was probably her brother, McGeesy. He's almost 100. "Do you know him, too?" "Not really. I don't think he and Grandma Lily spoke much." "But he still went to her funeral," Joey said. "Of course. He was her brother." As Levi looked ahead, he could see the apparition of a boy wading in the river, pulling an angry snapping turtle from the riverbed. The future and past were crashing together as the Philosopher's Stone prepared to be united with its master. It wouldn't be much longer now. "See anything?" Levi asked, closing his eyes to the madness that surrounded him. "Pewabic." "Nope." The wailing of women filled Levi's ears, growing stronger by the minute. It no longer felt as if they were bawling for the lost children as much as trying to stop him from doing what he intended to do. "I'm sorry for your loss, but this is the only way." Joey looked up at the sky instead of the banks of the river. "It looks like it's going to rain." "Yeah, the Wintermaker senses me and is about to have his talk pie make one hell of a storm," Levi said, noticing the black cloud bank building a few miles south. Lacey Morrison was back at Lake Manitou, but no longer in harm's way on Turtle Island. I think it suspects something is wrong. With Lily dead, there would be no one to stop the Wintermaker from rising out of the depths to claim its final victim. Lily's plan to send the Asante Lodge into battle had been a ruse, an Eos plan for their ceremony to coincide with summer solstice. Levi had a surprise for the arrogant Wintermaker, even if it meant the unthinkable. Clay, there it is. I see it. Clay, just like you said. Do you see it? Huh, Levi? Do you see it? Right over there, the rocks. It's blue, just like you said. Pewabik. All around Levi, the spirits swirled, fueling the storm that threatened to reach out all the way from the distant Lake Manitou. Look, it's dripping out of the hole up there. I think it's a cave. Levi could see how the sandstone rubble had broken away to reveal a fissure in the harder granite cliff that formed Blue Knife. He angled the old canoe to the shore. Now what? Joey asked as both of them climbed out of the canoe. Levi reached down and touched the blue vitriol with his fingers. He focused on the grit between his fingers, ignoring how he could see Shagobay just a few feet from him, smearing the blue paint on Joseph Nicolet's face in the distant past. He decided to do the same thing to Joey's face, bringing the past and future into an unending loop of influence. Pewabik, Levi repeated. Yeah, let's go climbing. As the two scrambled up the bluff, Levi noticed the low-flying clouds breaking off the thunderhead building over the lake. What if it rains so hard the river floods? Joey asked as they climbed over the last of the jagged sandstone to break free from the older granite. I guess you'll get wet. Is that why we're going to this cave? To hide from the storm? Levi stopped just below the dark hole. What's wrong? Joey asked. I'm getting kind of scared, Levi. You'll be fine, Clay. This is going to go just like we practiced. You have nothing to worry about. You just called me Clay. I did, didn't I? Let's keep going. Aren't we going to look inside? I already know what's inside, Clay. I need to help somebody first. I thought you said you've never been here before. As the cliff grew steeper, there were fewer and fewer footholds in the rock pile that accumulated from years of erosion, but the granite had enough imperfections and faults for Levi to find a way up the final 10 yards. At the summit, grass and weeds gave him a handhold to help pull Joey up to the top, bringing them into the thicket of dense pine brush. He stepped off 10 yards, waited, closed his eyes. First, I must close the loop. I know where the water drum can be found, Levi said to the past. I can help you save him. It's over here. Levi turned, not needing to see Lily standing in the window to the past. Save who? Joey asked. Great-grandfather Gene. If I don't show Lily how to find the water drum, neither of us can exist and the Wintermaker will win. This is the only way. Levi turned around and led the future and past back to the cave. In the past, the river was flooded all the way up to the top. I need you to lead Lily back down to the cave. Nervously glancing to the darkening sky, Joey's head frantically looked around him for the invisible reference Levi made. I need you to do this, Joey. I need you to go in there first. I'm scared, Levi. Don't be. I'm doing this to protect you. I'm doing this to protect everybody. I'd never let anything bad happen to you. Now, go down there and crawl into that cave. Clasping his brother by the hands, Levi helped Joey down to where his feet could grip the granite, and then his brother shuffled back to the dark entrance. Go ahead, Joey, it'll be fine. Joey disappeared. The past and the future began to crash around Levi, making it impossible to tell what he was seeing. Faces and voices swirled around him as the wind of the real storm began to build. He felt rain begin to drop from the billowing storm created by the confused talk-by. There's something in here, Joey called out. I know. Don't touch anything. I can feel it. It's giving off heat. I know, Levi shouted. Don't touch it. Remember how we practiced with the bowling ball? Joey stopped talking. Levi opened his eyes to the past, and on one side of the water's edge, he saw Lily Asabakashi crying as she emerged from the water. On the other side, he saw a woman in her 30s, the side of her head shaved with a gruesome pink scar above her eye. Where her right eye should have been, he only saw a smooth patch of skin. On her chest, she wore the logo of an NFL team that did not currently exist. I need you to teach her the secrets of the water drum, Levi said to the scarred woman. Sing the verses to Lily so she can save him. Levi took hold of her by the chin and looked in her remaining eye. And then I'll play my little trick. Robin told me all about you. We'll fix this together. Not waiting for an answer, Levi slid off the ledge and climbed back down to where Joey had disappeared. Okay, Joey, you can climb out. The boy scrambled out like a crab, blinking with wide eyes as the rain continued to intensify. In his hands, he held the end of the rope. There was someone in there. I know. Don't go in there, Levi. There's someone hiding in there. Levi bent down and kissed his brother on the forehead. Then he put the rope in his hands. Just like we practiced. Do you remember the count? 914 million, Joey teased. The short count, Joe. 1,000, and then I start pulling. And don't look back, right? Right, Joey began to cry, and a ripple of lightning in the clouds caused him to flinch. Don't go, Levi. Lily made a promise long ago. I'm going to fulfill that promise. Now, I need you to make another promise. If I don't come out at the count of 914 million, I need you to come get me. Don't leave me in there, Joey, or the Wintermaker will win. This isn't going to make sense now, but it will one day. Can you promise me? Joey nodded, and Levi hated himself for what he was doing to the poor boy. It was better than what Lily would have done to them. They all shared the same blood. So he crawled into the little opening of the cave, and the darkness closed in around him. At first, all he could sense was the Wintermaker, but as soon as he heard his ally begin to sing, he knew it would all be worth it. Chapter 61, Storm Chaser, Chippewa Beach, June 14th, 1986. Ansel Nielsen knew the storm was unnatural. He stood on the deck to watch the massive thunderhead just sit right over the lake. A great shadow formed from the towering plume of moisture, cooling the air 20 degrees and making the chill that Ansel felt even stronger. Around Chippewa Beach, mobile home park, other residents stepped outside. Retired know-it-alls shared their meteorological theories that the system had already passed them, but Ansel wasn't so sure. If not for the stillness of the massive storm cell, Ansel would have thought it was a tornado. But this tornado was frozen in place, and instead of spinning like a top, it funneled energy from the lake and up and into the mushrooming thunderhead. The screen door opened, and Grandma Ursula stepped into the space for a glance up at the ominous sky. Even though it was not yet noon, it had grown dark as night again, which is what likely drew her from her television programming. My word, she muttered, and the boards of the deck creaked as she drew near to watch the storm with him. Lightning spread through the crown of the mushroom, rippling horizontally rather than crashing down into the Hiawatha County. In the illumination of electricity, Ansel saw them. The oily creatures he'd been seen hiding in the shadows and hollows ballooned into monsters that swam within the moisture pulled up from the lake. He glanced over at Ursula, who obviously didn't see them. He looked to the onlookers. Nothing. It angered him to be so alone. But I'm not alone, am I? The energy of the storm was being fueled by unleashed magic from the dawn of time, and with the cold air that came rushing down from the atmosphere, the curtain that normally covered Lake Manitou was blown off, revealing a boy frantically trying to stay upon some orange raft. Ansel recognized the raft. It's me. A wave of magic, not real wind, capsized the raft, but when it emerged from the swells, another apparition sat upon it. A wiry farmer wearing a green and yellow DeKalb hat gripped the edges as the small vessel lurched in the waves. A wave swept him right off the raft. For a few moments, the farmer floundered, searching for the raft as he also kept his head above the water. Then a 10-foot wave crashed onto his head and buried him under the surface. A tan, blonde-haired man emerged. Dad. Jimmy Nielsen struggled in the wild surf for a few moments, finding breath between being pummeled by waves. He cried out, "Ansel!" Ansel took a few steps away from Ursula before remembering that his mind was only playing tricks on him. He gripped the wooden deck railing as he watched the vision from a distance. Another wave buried Jimmy Nielsen under the surf, but this time, instead of his father resurfacing, he saw himself emerge from the water. Right in front of the boat launch, a hand thrust up from the water to grab the metal pole, and when the rest of the body followed, Ansel saw a grievous wound to his own face. His jaw hung limp from his face like a glob of ice cream about to drop from the cone. Blood and teeth fell from the oblong opening that had been his mouth, and then he saw himself collapse on the dock, reaching a hand toward the center of the lake. A violent, cold gust came from the beach. This time everybody felt it. Some tried to collect loose items, and others went rushing back inside. Right behind the wind, sheets of rain followed. Grandma Ursula took him by the elbow and began pulling him back to the mobile home. He did not go willingly. In the howling wind, he heard voices crying, "Help me!" "Inside, now," Ursula said, as fierce winds ripped through the park. Debris kicked up from the storm, making it truly dangerous. Ansel relented and followed, rushing to the front of the living room to watch the storm beside the parrots Donald and Daffy. As rain gave into hail and the real world washed away the world of illusion, a tangible item came out of the storm, crashing onto the beach. An orange raft. Chapter 62. Shadow and Smoke. Turtle Island Reservation, June 14th, 1986. McGeesy ignored the screams of terror coming from his grandnephew Cameron and stepped out into the eye of the storm, ready to die a warrior. The wicker staff that held the sharp piece of pipestone helped steady him as the wind tried to batter him to the ground. His left arm, wrapped in his old turtle shield, shielded his face as the horizontal gusts of wind, and his fingers clutched the handle of the old hatchet strapped to the interior of the shell. A pouch at his belt held white cowrie shells, the Migi shells that had been collected from Minnesota to Montreal. The pines and birch danced in the violence, but McGeesy was steady and stood at the center of the storm. He looked up to face his enemy. The power of the water drum had transformed the Takpai from the little men of the forest into billowing black monsters that now swam upon the currents of the storm. "Babudiki, Bagamiya Aya," McGeesy shouted into the clouds above him. "The Winter Maker has arrived." Granted, it was a week early, and none of the Asante Lodge were there to support him, but McGeesy had prepared his whole life for the moment. He could feel the cold breath of his mortal enemy upon his face. "I shall feign weakness before striking." So he took a knee in the midst of the mighty storm. He still held onto his wicker spear, and now the turtle shell covered even more of his hunched body as the elements battered him. "McGeesy," Cameron called from the doorway, "come inside the cabin." "Go back and lock the doors," he shouted. "The Takpai have come." For the past 2 decades, McGeesy had hunted and had been hunted. In the battle at Carousel Island, Lily subdued 10 of the 12 creatures, but as 2 attacked Ed Nielsen, they were cast far beyond the island to where Albert Fisher and his grandson Chris were trying to open the floodgates and save Carousel Island from being flooded entirely. Shadow and Smoke, McGeesy named them. Like a great bear, McGeesy hunted the darkest confines of Lake Manitou for the 2 weakened predators. Once, he'd almost caught Smoke, only to have it vanish for the past decade. Shadow, however, lingered nearby, waiting for a moment of weakness. Now, with his wolf pack joining him, Shadow returned. Yet the Takpai, swirling above McGeesy's head, took no interest in him. "They are upset. They have been let off their chains and only run in circles. Who let them off their leash?" The song of the Manitou filled the air, sung by a chorus of voices. Even after a lifetime, neither he nor Lily discerned the origin of the strange language. Father Jean once believed that the ancient texts were likely hidden in some sort of container that the Anishinaabe called the sacred shell. Yet Lily learned the missing verses of the song from an apparition from the future. Now it seems the past, present, and future all sang in harmony. Even with the chaos of the storm above him, the song seemed to be coming from a distinct source near his sweat lodge at the cliff overlooking the river. His own grandfather had only partially taught him how to build a lodge before his death, so when McGeesy was grown, he went to others for their knowledge. As McGeesy followed the song to within 100 yards of the location, he finally understood that the Tokpai had not gathered to fight him, but to destroy his lodge. Why would they attack my lodge? Torrents of rain knocked him back and almost off his feet. Now the Tokpai descended, sweeping down like great black bats, but not to attack him. One by one they crashed into the lodge, busting it to pieces, allowing the wind and rain to continue the assault as they circled back. Now was my chance. McGeesy tossed off his shield, holding the wicker staff with both hands. He advanced slowly, readying his body for the thrust at the nearest Tokpai, even though he hoped it would be Shadow, his old nemesis. He kept his eyes up and ready, but then an explosion of energy came from the rock foundation of the Blue Knife River channel. He felt his arm and shoulders strike the hard ground. McGeesy, Cameron called out, but the sharp pains and spinning made the source of his voice confusing. Oh, I'm being blown back to the cabin. His body stopped rolling when it rested against the supports of his porch. Cameron loomed over him, his busy hands trying to tend to him and get him back to safety. Back at the sweat lodge, blasts of air, water, and magical energy came out of a hole that had been sealed for years. The Tokpai descended into the ravine and into the hole, and the storm intensified. Cameron put his hands under McGeesy's armpits and dragged him back into the cabin. Did I just lose? Chapter 63, God of Thunder, Brainerd, Minnesota, June 14th, 1986. Thomas Dobie sat in the Brainerd airport when he saw the storm build over Lake Manitou. With 2 runways and a helicopter pad, the small airport served mostly single-engine planes and a few commercial flights. Triton Corporation had 3 small planes in the hangar, which allowed businessmen to drop in and out without all the traffic flying into Minneapolis. Arriving early allowed him to not only witness the storm burst into the heavens, but also to allow his nerves to calm a bit in advance of the others' arrival. He had flown in directly from Albany, arriving with the dawn. The extra time allowed him to make sure the white Chevy Suburban suited their needs. He found a spot near the western glass window where he could see both the building storm and the white vehicle parked in the lot. At 11 o'clock, a gray blob burst into the upper stratosphere above the town of Brainerd. Sunny skies to the east only made circumstances appear darker and more menacing. From his studies, Dobie knew that the creatures inhabiting Lake Manitou, whether called Pukwudgies or Grimm, could manipulate the elements, but he didn't know whether the show warranted celebration or fear. The fireworks weren't supposed to be going off yet. Finally, one of the 2 planes arrived. It dropped from the eastern skies like a white paper airplane and then quietly taxied around toward the hangar. Unlike at a large airport, there were no gates connected to the terminal. Instead, stairs on wheels were pushed out to the tarmac. Maddie Sinclair stepped out of the plane first, her crimson hair unfurled like a flag. She wore khaki shorts with a blouse over a tank top. In her shadow, Trudy. The young girl looked at the pines surrounding the airport, then at Dobie, and then at the car. She expects to see her brother Modi, Dobie reflected. She last saw him alive back in December. He put the thoughts of the foul icehouse murder away. Welcome to Minnesota, ladies. How was your flight? I slept most of the way, Trudy said proudly. When I woke up, it was the next day. I wish I could do the same. If only today were already tomorrow. Dobie worried about their bold mission. Delhut wanted caution, but bold Maddie ended up getting her way. "How are things, Tom?" Maddie asked as she approached the SUV. "Cousin Val hasn't arrived yet, so we might have to wait for a bit. Do you want to just wait in the lobby or in the car?" "Shouldn't we just wait in the car?" Maddie asked. "How much longer will it be?" Tom glanced over his shoulder to the storm building in Hiawatha County. 100 storms like it across the continent could cause delay. "It should be here any minute." Maddie and Trudy chose to wait in the vehicle. A few minutes later, another private plane dropped from the sky onto the runway. When the door opened, Alphonse Levasseur, holding the hand of a 6-year-old boy with ginger hair, stepped out of the plane. The boy who will be king, Dobie reflected. The Avataraty. "Al, good to see you. How was your flight?" "Quite long." "Val?" Dobie called out to the boy, who looked a bit lethargic. "Are you ready for a grand adventure with all of your other cousins?" "I guess," the boy said softly and uncertainly. "Well, the lake is just an hour away. We'll stop for some lunch and then be on our way." As the Suburban drove down Highway 10, Maddie introduced the children to each other, acting as if it was the beginning of an important relationship. Dobie knew death or possible possession waited for the two lambs, so he kept his eyes on the storm. At the town of Staples, the temperature dropped 10 degrees and large drops of rain began to hit the windshield. By the time the vehicle turned north at Aldrich toward Lake Manitou, the winds and rain beat against the vehicle, forcing a tight grip upon the steering wheel. Do the evil spirits sense what we're about to do? Has someone woken them already? "Are you seeing this?" Dobie asked softly enough so the kids behind them did not notice the problem. "Oui, is it a problem?" Levasseur asked. Lake Manitou stretched 7 miles from corner to corner, yet all of it was blanketed by the darkness of the storm. "I think it's moving east." Making the final 3 miles slow, debris and puddles covered the road. At Sterling Junction, a tree covering half of the road forced Dobie to drive into another lane. Even though the surface of the lake looked like a washing machine on agitation cycle, the windshield wipers managed to keep up, a sign the storm was moving away. "You can't see it now," Maddie began her lie, "but Modi's school is somewhere on the far side of the lake." "I'm sure he's fine," Dobie lied about her sacrificed brother as the vehicle passed over the little bridge separating Haggard Bay and Lake Manitou. "But because of the storm, we might not be able to see him until tomorrow." The children accepted the lies, and soon Dobie was driving through the town of St. John. Sean Stewart lived in a small mansion along the shores of Lake Manitou. The plot of land housed dozens of mature pines and oaks in a field of lush green, over which leaves and branches were now strewn. Stewart stood at the end of the dock, his hands on his hips, as he watched the storm pass over the distant town of Split Rock. Seeing the Suburban, he walked quickly toward them. "Welcome to Lake Manitou," he called out as the doors began to open. He acted the part of the gracious host, whisking the children away for indulgence and adventure. "Can't trust a man who doesn't know his place," Dobie decided. He wants to elevate his status within both Triton and Eos. Dobie ignored the handshake. "Should we be concerned?" Maddie asked in reference to the storm. "Stay with the kids," Dobie said, knowing other critical matters needed to be set up before the summer solstice events. "I'm going to find Kirkpatrick and see how things are on his end." "Do you want me to come with you?" Levasseur asked. "Of course not. You are to stay with the young prince until this is over, understood?" Even though Dobie's relatives lived in Hiawatha County, he'd only been there once before, 6 months earlier. He'd done the intel, though, and knew the maps and terrain well enough that he instinctively drove east out of town through the gloom of the departing storm. He turned north at a private driveway of a little house tucked into the pines, but instead of stopping at the house, he drove around the garage. and found a simple road that led another mile into the woods. Hidden deep in the woods, he found a small complex of pole barns. Armed guards stepped out of hiding when they saw him exit the vehicle. Philip Marquette, once a son-in-law of Scott Sinclair, took the most modest approach to investing his Triton Corporation dowry. He went into the mortuary business, while his brother-in-law Ozias Haggard built a promising stone quarry, and Walter Stewart put his money into local businesses. Marquette Mortuary steadily invested in itself until the family accumulated a small fortune. Marquette knows his place, Dobie decided. The Marquette estate, built along the western bank of the Blue Knife River, allowed private recreation and entertainment. The jack pines had been replaced by old forest, and for miles in all directions, only squirrels watched the house. Unlike Stewart, the Marquette family stayed in their home, leaving the compound to Dobie and his men. One of the security guards jogged from the barn to arrive at the driver's door before Dobie stepped out. "You've got to come quick." "What is it?" "I'm not exactly sure." "What the fuck is this?" Dobie asked, seeing fear in the eyes of all his hired killers. Robert Kirkpatrick stepped out from the barn and jogged over to where Dobie parked. "So?" Kirkpatrick stopped in front of him, put his hands on his hips, and shook his head. "There's been an unexpected development." "The storm?" Dobie asked, seeing it leaving along the eastern side of the lake. Kirkpatrick's eyes watered as if in pain. "I don't know how to say this." "Just fucking say it." "During our preparations, we found, Dobie didn't know if he should ask what or where, but then knew one question might answer both. "Go on." "Down by the river, on the edge of the property. This just happened a few minutes ago. I didn't know what to do, Tom, but I think I know what it is. You need to see. Maddie needs to see. This changes everything." "Don't get your panties in a twist, Robbie." "Trust me, Tom. This changes everything." Chapter 64. A Hostile Witness. Old Copper Road, June 14th, 1986. Sheriff Brian Forsberg's Suburban slowed to a crawl as he approached the McPherson farm. Having just been out inspecting storm damage, he understood the strange nature of what he'd witnessed. So when he got the dispatch to head to the McPherson farm, he raced as fast as his reflexes would allow, yet he still hesitated a few hundred yards from the driveway. What just happened? It's too early. The solstice is days away. He leaned against the leather bench seats for the glove box, ignoring his .357 Magnum, and instead reaching for the other metallic object, his flask of Lord Calvert Canadian whiskey. He filled his mouth with enough liquid for 2 gulps, swishing it in his mouth like Listerine before forcing it down his gullet. He glanced at the ravine leading to the Crowing River, now filled with young leaf growth, unable to see the spot that haunted him. From the ashtray, he pulled out a pack of Big Red gum and cinnamon and whiskey mixed. His fears and fury subsided, and once ready, he shifted the SUV into gear and joined a Hiawatha County prowler already parked at the house. The house had a dozen other vehicles parked in front of it, with cousins and uncles from Clan McPherson ready to do battle with any enemy. The men gathered around the vehicles that knew him as well as Forsberg knew them, and his eyes barked orders that were obeyed. They kept their distance, glancing at the house. More McPhersons greeted him inside the coat room. Most of the elder children and female in-laws lingered in the kitchen. A few greeted him, but most stepped aside, clearing a path through the kitchen and into the dining room, where Deputy Scott Baby Gerber sat at the long table with Gavin and Nicole McPherson. Gavin stood and shook hands in a fierce grip, but his eyes filled with sorrow and defeat. He thinks his son is dead. "Oh, praise Jesus, you're here," Nicole said from her chair. Instead of rising to greet him, she just hunched over in a ball, hiding her face for a few minutes before straightening out to ask, "What do we do, Biff?" At one point, Nikki Guerin outranked Marilyn Monroe, Catherine Deneuve, and Elizabeth Taylor as the fantasy girl for seventh grade boys at Split Rock high schools. 30 years later, she still had dyed her hair blonde, but raising a large family, had stolen her youthful figure. Prior to serving a fateful detention, a pubescent Biff looked away every time Nikki walked by for fear of being aroused, but even after Mrs. Crane united them in common purpose, he still struggled to look her in the eyes. Once, Gavin had drawn his blood, yet Nikki had all but castrated him during a melee in the detention room. And 3 decades later, her eyes still wounded him, yet Sheriff Forsberg had a job to do. Forsberg then realized she had her youngest wrapped in a blanket at her feet, with her legs serving as pillars of protection. "Whatever it takes, Nikki. Now tell me what happened." Deputy Gerber repeated the situation previously relayed to him by phone and radio. Levi McPherson was missing. Joseph McPherson, 6 years old, had been found by Ed Williams, a Split Rock resident who said the boy was confused and staggering near Split Rock Creek. In the past few hours, according to Gerber, the boy had not spoken about either his brother or a storm he'd endured. Thanks to the quick work of Clan McPherson, they also knew that Levi had vanished without packing or taking his prized Mustang, pilfering an old farm truck instead. No one knew if Joey had been with Levi or if both had left the house separately prior to the arrival of the storm. This has got to be the work of Eos. Sweet Jesus, did they snap up Levi? Did Joey escape alone? Forsberg felt the whiskey pulsing through the capillaries in his flesh, and the more he learned, the hotter he felt, especially with the eyes of so many relatives around him. "That was quite the storm, wasn't it, little man?" Forsberg asked Joey once Gerber finished. At the lack of response, he looked around the room at all the people looking to him for answers. "If there are too many eyes for me, imagine how the kid feels." "You've had a long day, little man. Perhaps it's time for bed? Nikki, help me get him upstairs to his bedroom." "Do you want me to come with?" Gavin asked Forsberg. And Forsberg nodded in affirmation. With Joey wrapped in a blanket in Nikki's arms, the 3 adults went up the stairs that led into the second floor. In a narrow hallway with several doors, Nikki led Forsberg to a small room at the end of the hall with a bunk bed in the corner. 4 feet from the foot of the bunk bed, another staircase led to the 3rd story. "Whose room is that?" Forsberg asked. "Levi's," Gavin said, and then ignored. Then he gripped Forsberg by the arm, pulling him aside as Nikki set her youngest down on the bottom bunk. Gavin struggled for obvious words, and after several false starts that ended in only gasps of air, his grip turned into a full embrace, and the steely farmer crumbled into Forsberg's chest. Nikki was always stronger, Forsberg realized as he looked at her sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting. She tried so hard to protect her family from this moment arriving. Joey curled into a ball beside his mother, lying sideways, his eyes still open, using the blanket as a shield. Several times in his life, Forsberg had seen traumatized children, including those who had been snatched from the icy grip of the Manitou. He's faking, Forsberg thought, but that did not change the reality that something awful had happened. "I'll be right back. Stay here with him." Then Forsberg walked up the stairs to the 3rd floor, each step creaking under his weight. The attic had been turned into a shrine of adolescence, hard rock posters interspersed with posters of models. Casual chaos without a sign, Levi planned on doing anything other than sleeping in another night in his own bed. In the window, a dream catcher hung, and Forsberg walked toward it, his boots echoing in the room below. "We thought we had it figured out also," Forsberg recollected about the study hall gang assembled by Mrs. Crane. "What did this idiot do?" Forsberg lifted the dream catcher to see if anyone looked back at him. It was empty. Hoping against a worst-case scenario, Forsberg retreated back downstairs, void of any clues. Levi told me his plan, Forsberg bluffed to the boy. He wanted to make sure you were safe. Now, I want to make sure he is safe. Joey remained frozen, his eyes looking outward with an occasional blink. We haven't been able to get a word out of him since he returned home, Nicky said. We're not even sure if Levi was with him. And I won't ask any questions for now. It's been a hard day for Joey, and he should probably get some rest. But, Nicky began, but Levi, let's give Joey some time to rest, Forsberg said, patting him on his legs. Could you get him into a fresh pair of pajamas? Nicky seemed to understand the strategy and walked over to the dresser, returning with a pair of pajamas. With a little coaxing, she moved her son into a sitting and then standing position as she had done numerous times before. Forsberg watched carefully as she lifted his shirt over his head. Once the shirt was off, she handed it to Gavin. Okay, sweetie, now turn around. Forsberg scanned for any bruises, abrasions, or scratches on the boy's torso, but found nothing amiss. When she lifted her arms to slip on the fresh shirt, she paused. Your fingernails are filthy. Still playing the part of zombie boy, Joey let her twist his palm for inspection before she finished slipping the shirt on. Next, she took off the pants, lifting his knees to step out of them. There was no soiling of the underwear, nor any marks of his legs either. Your socks are wet, she said. The boy had been out in the storm, yet after a few hours under the blanket, his clothes had mostly dried. When Joey was dressed, Forsberg stood up to allow Nicky space to get Joey into bed. Gavin handed him the clothes. It was only a tertiary examination to realize the sand particles on the shirt, along with some bluish-green smudges. On the front of the boy's Star Trek t-shirt, the decal of a furry Tribble seemed to have melted a bit. Turning to the pants, Forsberg noticed how the bottom 3 inches of the pants were still saturated, while the rest of the pants were just slightly damp. The Blue Knife River. It was a start. Forsberg took a few steps away from the door, and Gavin followed closely. As in the days of the deer stand, both grown-up boys waited for the queen bee to finish her maternal duties. Nicky pulled the door almost shut to shield their voices as they stood in the hall. Forsberg took another step to peer down the stairs to check for privacy. We're going to begin a search of the Blue Knife River. It's most likely the reason why Levi took the truck instead of the Mustang, and for the looks of Joey's socks and cuffs, he's been wading in water. The mud on his shirt means he was either somewhere along the Blue Knife or out at Bleeding Rock. Oh, dear God, Nicky gasped. Forsberg also thought of what happened to Isaac Larson years earlier. I don't know where this is going to end. It ends with you finding Levi, Nicky snapped. All I'm saying is that I'm going to need to call in help, Nicky. The lights are about to get very bright. What's that supposed to mean? You've been hiding from it for a long time, Forsberg began, and then shifted strategy when he saw her ready to emotionally break. For all we know, Levi is sitting under a tree with a whiskey bottle. But I'm going to call in a child psychiatrist that specializes in interrogations, and then I'm going to call in Ron Spears to begin a search of the Blue Knife, which will most likely end with a call to the BCA and FBI. If Levi is truly missing, the national news will descend upon us. I'll have 24 hours before somebody looking for a career case comes with a letter from the governor taking over the investigation. I need any leads so I can act quickly before other investigators show up. Lacey Morrison, Nicky quickly offered. She works in a nursing home and spent a lot of time with Levi and Lily. You need to talk to her. Levi's been spending a lot of time with Joey recently, Gavin offered. They were, working out behind the barn, something about Rocky IV training. Levi was training? No, it was Joey. I think I remember him saying something about bullying. Perhaps some trouble with kids at school? I don't know. Gavin and Nicky tried to distance themselves from the Asante Lodge, yet they knew what Lily's death meant. Brian let his anger get the better of him. There's a dream catcher hanging in the upstairs window. I've been patrolling for monsters. All you need to do is just keep your kids home. Was that too much to ask? Why am I hearing about these issues now? Gavin put a hand on Forsberg's shoulders and then also on his wife's shoulder, physically uniting the three of them for a moment. What do you need from us? They're both clueless. Sit tight for the evening. I'll take this to the next level and get the search started overnight. And by morning, if we haven't found him, there'll be a lot of questions asked. And? Gavin asked, finding his resolve again. There are 3 possibilities right now, and the first will come at you fast. The second possibility is that Levi ran away for a reason. If he did have a reason, then we need to protect your family, don't we? In that case, insist on having myself or Ron Spears with you at all time. Or I can have Lieutenant Harper with you for oversight. They can watch over you guys if anything gets intense. The third possibility is abduction. If you remember what happened to McGeesey back in the day, you know this can take a few forms. I'm going to have Father Gary and McGeesey meet in order to... Why didn't I act faster? I should have hauled his asked to jail for arson and watch over him myself. This can't be happening, Nikki said, pulling her shoulder away from Gavin. Not again. This isn't real. We've... Despite her turned back, Gavin wrapped her arms around her, whispering in her ear. Use your family, Forsberg said. Make sure every family member is being watched. Keep them gathered together until I can sort things out. By the time Forsberg returned to the SUV, night had arrived. He called dispatch and got the operation rolling, setting up operation centers at Nimrod and Turtle Island Jesuit School. On his way, he'd stop and speak with McGeesey, although he feared the answers he'd get. But as he reached the end of the driveway, he drove down the gravel road only a few yards before stopping. With his flashlight in hand, he climbed into the grassy ditch and passed by a few old familiar trees. The ravine was still damp from the deluge, and the crowing river flowed with its light rumble as it leapt over rocks and branch. Looking down, he realized his feet left footprints. Whatever happened, there will be footprints. I hope to God there are footprints, Forsberg thought, remembering the tales of the others told of Tokpai and Manitous. I can handle footprints. His flashlight found a few old boards still clinging to a tree, but the deer stand had rotted away years ago. Levi would not be found huddled inside, but nevertheless he still scanned the area for the tree for footprints before turning back to begin the hunt for answers. Chapter 65. A Change is Going to Come. St. John, Minnesota, June 15th, 1986. Captain Chuck Looning pulled up to the small cottage in his 1985 Ford Bronco II and popped the horn so quickly it sounded like the Roadrunner. He pushed the eject button on his car stereo and Sam Cooke's 20 Greatest Hits cassette stopped playing. The garage door opened, revealing an ever-shrinking superhero in leather work boots. Even in retirement, Wally Crane dressed ready for chores. As a boy, Chuck had been part of Boy Scout Pack 88, and his pack leader was a tattooed sailor who reminded everyone of Popeye. Back in 1949, Wally Crane oozed testosterone from his armpits, grit from his brow, and machismo from his mouth. The foul-mouthed World War II vet could flip a switch when around civilized adults, but when he was around 11-year-old boys, he imparted a crash course on being a man. When did he get so old? The garage door opened fully to show Wally holding a metal lunchbox, something Chuck didn't even consider bringing. For 4 decades, Wally hauled fuel oil for Ullman Oil, retired at the age of 58, and lost his house and half of his wife the following year. Wally stepped to the side of the garage and pushed another button to close the garage door behind him. Wally should be jigging for walleyes in a boat, not dealing with this shit. This is a beautiful vehicle, Wally said as soon as he fell into the seat. I got the Eddie Bauer edition. Who's Eddie Bauer? Damned if I know. Chuck shrugged at his own ignorance and arrogance for bringing it up. He knew his humble family history. Farrell Looning had been a hard-working peasant who worked for lumber baron George Fisher, so he had no problem spending the family inheritance on a nice truck. Chuck's mother, Betsy, still lived the life of royalty even though Farrell's sawmill and George's lumber mill were both gone. Any updates from Forsberg? Wally shook his head, eyes grim. Still think this is a good idea? Wally sighed. It needs to be done. The servants of the Wintermaker come in many forms, spiritual and physical. Back in 1962, our greatest threats came from the humankind. Chuck backed the Bronco out of the driveway and onto the quiet streets of St. John. Although it was almost 8 o'clock, the town still slept on a Sunday morning, with most church services beginning around 10 o'clock in Hiawatha County. Back in 1962, Chuck was stationed in Georgia while he was learning how to be a helicopter pilot. He'd heard the stories about the Red Thunderbird, the child molester Logan Truce, the terrible winter, and the epic flood that almost destroyed both towns on Lake Manitou. But none of it explained or justified how he'd lost his grandpa and little brother in an accident. Now, Levi McPherson was missing, and EOS still hadn't paid the price for what happened decades earlier. For this reason, Chuck had 2 loaded shotguns sitting in the back seat of the Bronco. It was a short drive. Halfway to the Blue Knife River Bridge, Wally spoke softly. I drove out of town on this very road the day the Stewart boy disappeared. EOS isn't afraid to eat one of its own. Don't forget that. Time to get in the fight. Even in the Vietnam War, Chuck had been late to join the fight. When it became obvious that helicopters would be used to fight in the remote jungles of Vietnam, he helped train pilots on the new types of helicopters being sent into combat. He'd been flying the new AH-1G gunship that was shot down in July of 1972 as the U.S. transitioned from a ground war to an air war. Chuck had less dread when he lost the tail rotor than he did as he stepped on the brake and turned onto the paved Marquette driveway. It had a metal gate closing it off from the world, and even from the truck, Wally could see a lock upon it. The Marquettes liked their privacy. Chuck put the Bronco into 4-wheel drive and drove through a narrow gap in the jack pines. While Forsberg and his deputies had to play by the rules, a couple well-intentioned local boys could get a free pass for zealously searching for a missing boy. The Marquettes weren't answering their phones, so a forceful bit of trespassing seemed warranted on a Sunday morning. The Bronco quickly returned to the paved driveway and slowly approached the estate. When the jack pines opened to a 20-acre clearing, a beautifully pristine complex welcomed them. Several cars and recreational vehicles were parked in the loop in front of the house and in front of the large garage behind the home. Wally reached for his lunchbox as Chuck stepped on the brakes. The front door was open, and a dead dog rested on the ground near the front steps. Chuck flinched when Wally's hand pulled a revolver from the lunchbox. Father Guerin's pistol. The hair stood up on Chuck's forearms. After crash landing in Laos, far behind enemy lines, he had to sneak through the rivers and jungles to reach Thailand, where a prostitute nursed him back from death's door and helped him find a way home. 4 months of hiding from certain death made him wary, so he had no qualms grabbing the shotgun before he opened the doors of the Bronco. Hold on 1 second, Wally, Chuck said as Wally took a few steps toward the open door. Chuck reached the back of the Bronco and held the horn for several seconds and then followed by 3 quick bursts. Hello? Is anyone home? There wasn't even a dog bark. Go back around, Chuck said. I'll check the house. The heck with that. We'll go in together. I don't want you shooting me just because you get jumpy. We'll go in together. Blood splatter covered the back wall of the entryway. A pair of feet could be seen through an adjacent doorway. Wally breathed heavily beside him. Hello? Chuck called out it loudly again. Is anyone here? Silence answered them. Chuck could only look at Wally's bewildered face and shake his head. What are we doing? Keep an eye out, he said before stepping closer to check the body. The blood was dark, a sign the murder hadn't happened recently. Marion Marquette had a chunk of her collarbone, neck, and jaw missing from the shotgun blast that had painted the entryway wall. She was quite obviously dead. The second victim was the phone on the wall, blasted to pieces by the attacker's shotgun. Chuck looked back to Wally. "Be sure not to touch anything. We don't want to be implicated." "We need to look to see if there are others," Wally insisted. "Damn it, he's right." The pool of blood from Marion Marquette had footprints that led deeper into the house. Chuck made sure to steer clear of the boot prints and followed them to the living room, where Todd Marquette was lying dead in the shattered pieces of a coffee table. 3 bullet holes, likely from a pistol, dotted his chest. On the far end of the house, Chuck found the old man, Al Marquette, lying dead in the hallway. From there, he found a bedroom where a young woman had been shot 3 times. Stephanie, if you remember the name correctly. "This family has targeted. This wasn't a break-in gone bad," Chuck said aloud. 2 shooters entered the house from both sides, one with a shotgun and the other with a pistol. "Didn't Marquette have a young boy? Nate?" Chuck made eye contact with Wally to ask, "What about the boy?" "Levi! Levi McPherson! Are you here?" Wally shouted loudly. "Not Levi, Nate. Does he think Levi did this?" Chuck put the timeline together. Levi had vanished less than 24 hours earlier, and from the looks of it, the Marquettes were killed sometime last night. But no, it couldn't have been Levi, even though the Blue Knife River was only a mile away through the jack pines. It can't be a coincidence. Eos ate their own to cover something up. Chapter 66. Caught in the Net. Split Rock, Minnesota, June 15th, 1986. Carson Looning threw himself into an old project, assembling a new computer. The rest of Asante Lodge were running all over Hiawatha County like chickens with their heads cut off, but Carson could not follow, so he let his own troubled mind fixate on something other than the Levi problem. His brand new IBM RT PC had arrived in March, but Halley's Comet, astronomy, and the end times stole his attention. With the new keyboard on his lap, Carson rolled down the hall to his great-grandfather Albert's study. The study held a collection of thousands of books, mostly nonfiction and historical. 36 feet of laminate countertop had been set up in front of the library shelves, allowing Carson the freedom to roll up to his Apple computers, his Apollo, the Sun, or the DEC. The new IBM was faster and more powerful than any of the others, if he could get the stupid keyboard to work. What a mess. The packing box, screwdrivers, cables, tower, monitor, and mouse were still sitting where he'd left them. Now, instead of missing keyboard, he had a missing person and a murdered family. The red phone rang, startling him. He pushed away from the countertop and rolled over to his grandfather's desk, where the private, unlisted phone number rang for his attention. "This is Carson," he announced, unsure of who answered the beacon for help. "This is Grady, out at the Brainerd hangar. I've got some information you might want." "Same rate as before?" "Suppose." "Then what you got?" Carson asked, his heart racing. "Flight departed a few minutes ago, headed for MSP. "The passengers?" "That smoking hot redhead? She was there. So was the guy and 2 kids." "Same 4 departed together?" Carson clarified, having heard of their staggered arrival after pressing Grady for more information a day prior. "All together." "The solo guy in the white Chevy?" Carson asked. "No sign of him. The other planes are still parked." "You're the man, Grady. You're the man. Let me know if you see that fellow with the goatee come around again, and I'll pay double. Keep things on the down low, though." After hanging up the red phone, Carson could no longer focus on the new computer. He left things where they were and rolled back down the hall to the kitchen for a bite to eat. He was rummaging through the snack cabinet when the wireless wall phone rang. "Carson speaking," he answered. "Oh, hey," a woman's voice answered. "I wasn't sure if I'd reach you, and the name of the phone book was—" "Yeah, this is my grandmother's house. Lacey?" The sniffle confirmed the young woman had been crying. Uh-huh. Did you hear about the Marquette murders and Levi McPherson vanishing? I have, Lacey. I know on good authority that a lot of quality people are looking for him right now, Carson said in reference to Forsberg's APB. I've heard that folks think Levi's a suspect. Oh no, don't rush to judgment. All we know is that he's missing. I've got a theory, but, is this why she's calling? Go ahead, you can trust me. It's stupid and weird, but you know that Mrs. Crane's manuscript? The one that Wally asked me to read to her? Well, in it, she's got a character that seems to be a lot like Levi, and in her story, he decides to run away to get away from his overbearing mother, and one thing leads to another, and he ends up joining his favorite heavy metal band. Carson also remembered the irony of seeing the Kaufman name used for another character. What about it? Levi's been acting funny for the past few weeks, and perhaps all of his strange comments were about running away. Why would he leave his Mustang at home? Carson offered. How did Joey end up north of town all by himself? I don't know, Carson. But I do know the thought of him running away is much better than him getting involved in that mess at the Marquette place. I just can't picture him involved in any of that mess. Yeah, me either, Carson added, and tried to help the Asante Lodge by asking, and you haven't spoken to him since graduation, I think. I called him after Lily's passing, but he didn't go to the funeral, so I haven't seen him since my open house. I just needed to sort through things in my head, and you're the only one I could talk to about the manuscript. It's so weird. Do you know anybody named Ansel? Yeah, I think I do. What about him? Who is he? Why are you asking? Well, he's all over Mrs. Crane's manuscript also. I mean, I just don't know what to think. It's all kind of deja vu stuff. Do you think Mrs. Crane was psychic? Carson let out a long exhalation before he answered. I don't know what to tell you, Lacey. I've known her since I was your age, and there was nothing kooky or strange. To be honest, it's probably just all coincidence. She just probably picked names from her world, never expecting folks to read the stories. I'll look into things when I head to work. I'll give you my opinion after I look things over, but just remember, I'm not much of a reader. Thanks, Carson. You're the best. I'm going to go to the sheriff's department tomorrow morning to make a statement about my dealings with Levi recently. Should I say anything to them about Mrs. Crane's manuscript? I'm friends with both Wally and Forsberg, so I'll say something to them instead. Chin up, kid. Things will work out in the end. I hope so. Thanks again, Carson. Why do I feel as if that's not the end with her? After the conversation ended, Carson returned to the snack cabinet where he found a can of Pringles. Computers and junk food helped him cope with stress. He was rolling back down the hallway to the study when he caught a strange image in his reflected image. The sun had set and darkness arrived, making the western windows a mirror. But within the reflection of his own head, he could see through the glass to the yard where the big willow tree loomed. He knew its history as well as its recent events, so when he saw a piece of white fabric move, he skidded to a stop. What the heck is that? At first, it looked like a comical Halloween ghost costume, but then he realized it was a white blanket thrown over the shoulders of a small, blonde-haired child. The young girl stopped when she saw him looking out from the illuminated hallway. Carson pivoted and propelled his wheelchair as fast as his arms allowed. By the time he got to the entryway door, he could see the little girl running toward the yard, toward the street. Hey, wait up. I just want to talk, he called out. But the girl didn't stop running until she reached the end of the driveway and street. I could hear her footsteps. She wasn't a ghost. That kid was real. All alone, Carson suddenly realized that he had no one to talk to about the strange encounter. And even if he had company, he wasn't sure which of his friends he'd talk to about it. For a moment, he thought about calling Lacey Morrison back, but instead, he turned to his new computer to forget about everything. Chapter 67, Guardians of the Knife. Turtle Island Reservation, June 15th, 1986. Leonard White Elk sat on McGeesy's deck and smoked alone. The old man had to be lifted into bed due to the beating he'd taken the previous day. Whoa, and seeing him in such poor condition made Leonard worry he wasn't going to live long enough to give a proper account of what happened. This place is evil indeed, Leonard decided as he picked up his calabash pipe with tobacco and lit it with a match. When the flame descended into the tobacco leaves, the light was replaced by the floodlights set up near the river. "It's not my fight," he told himself when he heard voices in the distance. "Just mind your own business for the next few days until the dust settles." He'd only taken a few drags from his pipe when the front door opened and closed. His nephew, Ben Labiche, joined him at the railing of the porch. Even though they were relatives, Ben carried Anishinaabe and Shuswap DNA, whereas Leonard had Anishinaabe and Dakota, making him taller and leaner than his nephew. "McGeesy settled in for the night," Ben declared. "He won't take any medicine and refuses to be taken to a hospital." "He's a tough old bird," Leonard said with a deep voice that held no humor. Yet when he turned to Ben, the young man smirked. "Yes, he is. That is quite a story Cameron told us, wasn't it? I'm angry at myself for leaving them in their time of need." "You thought there was still time to help," Ben reviewed their last-minute trip to Lake Manitou after the passing of Lily Guerin. "How could you know? So, what do you make of the disappearance of the McPherson boy?" "Murder creates black magic, and black magic hangs upon the air all around Lake Manitou. If I were to guess, I'd say the murders happened to mask what was really happening here. And the Memagwisi that attacked McGeesy?" "Demons," Leonard corrected, and then conceded. "Evil spirits that haunt this place. Were they serving the will of their master or trying to protect him? That answer is yet to be seen." "So you think Cameron and McGeesy were telling the truth?" "McGeesy is an honest man, and Cameron is a simpleton, so yes, I think they were both being truthful. But they only saw a small part of what happened. The storm, the murders, Levi, the cave, the child. We might not ever find out what happened here, but we do have one good thing to celebrate." "Celebrate?" Ben recoiled in near disgust. "The world did not end today," Leonard reviewed. "We live to fight another day." For a few minutes, uncle and nephew sat in harmony in the night. Then the angry voices grew louder, and an air horn shattered the peace. "What's going on?" Ben asked, and immediately began walking outside to find for himself. Leonard reluctantly followed, knowing already what he'd find. 100 paces away, night turned into day under the brightness of the portable floodlights set up on the edge of the river. Across the river and several hundred yards through the woods, the Marquette property drew the attention of Hiawatha County Sheriff's Department, who not only secured the crime scene but also began searching for the missing Levi McPherson. Even though Leonard had grown up in British Columbia, he knew who ran things on the reservation, and within minutes of discovering what happened to McGeesy, he put a contingency plan into place. Now, a dozen armed tribal police officers, some real and others just wearing the uniform, stood along the eastern banks of the Blue Knife River. In the water and on the western bank, Hiawatha County Sheriff Department deputies stood with various detectives and investigators. Sheriff Forsberg stood with one foot on a small boulder and another on a john boat captained by a local river rat. Forsberg still held the air horn in his hand. Mizhike Reservation's fiercest men guarded the small opening to the cave, just below where McGeesy's sweat lodge had been built. "Finally," Forsberg muttered when he saw Leonard standing at the top of the ravine. "Can you tell all these fine people that we're allies?" "Are we?" Leonard asked flatly, bringing grins from the local men. "The MBO might exist within Hiawatha County, within the state of Minnesota, and within the United States of America, but we're a sovereign nation with sovereign rights. The riverbank beneath my feet is a beyond your jurisdiction. Leonard, I'm just trying to eliminate a few possibilities, and I've got investigators on this side of the river calling up my ass for answers, and your guys are only making matters worse. By tomorrow afternoon, the FBI will be showing up. Do you want to be dealing with them or me? The FBI only has jurisdiction on sovereign lands when a major crime happens against a person living on the reservation. I'm not a lawyer, but neither the Marquette family nor the missing teen belong to the Turtle Island Reservation. Neither do you, Forsberg turned back. Can you and I talk for a few minutes? Little to no privacy remained in the ravine thanks to the 4 floodlights that illuminated the stretch of river. Forsberg sighed and began climbing to where White Elk stood. Leonard could hear him muttering profanities with each step he took. He and Forsberg stepped around a corner using bushes as a shield. He gave Forsberg a moment to catch his breath. Any news about the McPherson boy? Leonard asked softly. Forsberg nodded. We found the birch bark canoe in Lake Manitou this morning, and according to my man down in the John boat, the truck had been parked up by Nimrod Bridge as recently as Saturday night. What about the boy himself? Forsberg took one final huff of breath before regaining his composure. His body could be stuck in that cave. Leonard shook his head. I checked myself at McGeesy's behest. You entered a potential crime scene? Leonard reached out a hand and clamped it on Forsberg's shoulder. While Forsberg could normally use his size to bully others, Leonard had several inches of height and 50 more pounds more muscle than the younger sheriff. While their relationship was limited, Leonard knew Forsberg's role and vice versa. The white egg is gone. Forsberg swallowed and processed the information. This is all a cover-up, isn't it? Eos stole it and murdered that family for knowing too much. God damn it. Levi stepped right into the shit, didn't he? McGeesy is nursing wounds up at his cabin after what happened in the storm. Yeah, I got that much from Cameron when I interviewed the McPherson family. McGeesy claims he and Lily left the stone hidden in the solid rock. It would take dynamite to get it out, yet during the story, the demon Takpai rushed the cave, and he claimed to have heard the Song of the Manitou on the air. Again, Forsberg took a moment to process before he muttered, The kid was hiding something from us. Could he have taken the Philosopher's Stone and run? It's a better thought than it being in the hands of Eos, Leonard admitted. The Mizhike band of Ojibwe will not allow you, the FBI, or any outsider to take another step toward the cave. You have to understand something very important. Generations ago, the Ouijigan hid the water drum and ironwood scrolls in that cave for safekeeping. Ironwood scrolls? Forsberg queried. Leonard nodded, finding relief to be speaking to an ally in such matters. Likely not the original Ironwood scrolls, but they are still a significant historical record for the Ojibwe and Ouijigan clan. Knowing time was of the essence, I had to alert tribal police, which is why they are so earnestly guarding it and will continue to guard it. You need to take my word that Levi McPherson is not in the cave. The stone is gone? I believe McGeesy when he says they were ambushed, but then again, he never saw Levi during any of it. Or Joey? Joey? The kid, the little brother. We think the two of them came down the river in the canoe. The boy was found wandering back into town just as the storm was ending. Now Leonard took his time to process. The Omadai. All this time I worried about Lily Guerin betraying us. I'd hate to say I told you so, but it seems as if her family has somehow secured another generation for humanity. Excuse me? My mother Fawn was right. Lily and Jean Guerin were wrong. Halley's comet was a harbinger for the end of the 6th fire and the beginning of the 7th. All her preparation for fighting the Wintermaker was for naught. The real battle won't happen for another 75 years. Okay, but I don't give a shit about that. I'm looking for the boy, the men who killed the Marquette family, and apparently a missing stone. No one outside the Santee Lodge can know about the missing stone. Watch Eos. Their actions will show whether or not they have acquired it. Without the Ironwood Scrolls, or, well, let's just say none of their plans can come to fruition unless they have all the pieces of the puzzle. Then I need you to do your part and get those relics out of the cave as soon as possible. I'm sure you're familiar with U.S. government overstepping treaty rights, and with EOs pulling the strings, they might not be that much I can do to help them. I understand. We've got some scholars and experts arriving tomorrow. Don't let it fall into the wrong hands, Forsberg said, and walked back down into the ravine. White Elk followed and nodded in affirmation to Ben. Okay, boys, we're calling it a night. We'll let the feds sort things here. He and Ben watched the local agents depart and the John boat shoot back up the river. With the authorities were gone, Leonard called out, "Well done, gentlemen. Stay vigilant. There's more danger than white men lurking in these woods." Chapter 68. Eye of the Hurricane. St. John, Minnesota, June 16th, 1986. Forsberg stepped aside and David Drosch from the BCA stepped to the microphone to explain the procedures they would take to find Levi McPherson. Like the press conference for the slain Marquettes, this one was packed. The McPherson clan sat to the front 2 rows, concerned citizens sat behind, and all the media outlets filled the rear and sides with cameras. Whispers had already begun about a connection between the 2 cases. Forsberg felt his tie tighten at his Adam's apple, and his sweat began to soak through his white dress shirt. He listened to the regional superintendent from Bemidji list off all the tools at the BCA's disposal. He stared at the ashen face of Nikki McPherson, who listened intently as the BCA promised to expand the net of investigation across Minnesota, which she needed to hear. There had been no sign of McPherson family truck anywhere in Hiawatha County, nor had there been a body. Drosch finished his remarks about the case and stepped away from the lectern. Forsberg stepped back to the microphone. Again, today is about Levi. Today is about hope. Levi McPherson is still missing, and we must share his story if we are to bring him home. If anyone has information involving the whereabouts of Levi McPherson, they are encouraged to call the Hiawatha County Sheriff's Department. We are hopeful that someone will do the right thing, step forward, and help us bring Levi home. I'd like to thank Levi's family for their continued support, as well as the county attorney, our county investigators, and the task force from the BCA. I'd like to reiterate that we will not give up before we are determined to. We will not give up because we are determined to bring Levi home. Thank you. For the next 20 minutes, Forsberg's head throbbed with each question thrown at him, but he endured and kept things moving. Soon the wave passed over him. He lingered in the conference room for the casual conversations. Nicky McPherson tried to give him insight into facts that he already knew about Levi. Wally let him know he'd check in on Ansel. Chuck Looning let him know that MBO agents had access to the cave. Finally, he walked back to his office for a few minutes of solitude. After making the necessary calls, Forsberg pushed his chair away from his desk and walked back out to talk with Mia Donaldson. He handed her a list of items that needed attention and received updates on both investigations. Detective Ray Irvin worked the Marquette case, and his least experienced detective, Darlene Van Zatten, worked the McPherson case. Her experience in robbery investigations would hopefully help. Sitting in Van Zatten's office, Detective Ross Coleman conducted interviews while Van Zatten looked for leads. Sitting in the interrogation room, Lacey Morrison wiped tears while Coleman jotted down her answers. Coleman had already collected statements from the family, a group of kayakers on the river on Saturday, and several campers at Turtle Island State Park. As he stood in the hallway, Percy Thorgard caught his eye from the lobby. Forsberg walked over to the lobby. "Not now, Percy." Percy Thorgard held the press conference release crafted by the Hiawatha Sheriff's Department 2 hours earlier. "So what's the deal with the truck?" "Everything we know is written down on the sheet of paper you're holding." "Oh, please, I spoke with the kayakers who found the canoe. It It wasn't just any canoe, was it? An antique birch bark canoe? Now you have all those divers looking for a body in Lake Manitou, but the truck is still missing. Who moved the truck from the launch site? For all we know, some shipbird is hiding in his garage right now, too afraid to step forward. So you think the truck was stolen? There is a lot of river to investigate, Forsberg said. What do you think the little brother witnessed? At least tell me that. Not today, Percy. He walked back into the hallway just as Lacey Morrison stood up from her chair in the interrogation room. Forsberg opened the door. Mind if we have a quick talk in my office? Both assumed Forsberg was talking to them. I'll get to you in a bit, Detective. I'd just like a word with Miss Morrison before she leaves. He took a step back, led her to his office door, and closed his door once she'd found the chair. This isn't an interrogation, young lady. I just want for us to get to know each other for a little while. He sat heavily into his chair. You're certainly in the eye of the hurricane, aren't you? She didn't understand his comment. You were there with Lily in her final days. Wally Crane trusts you with his wife's manuscript. You're friends with Carson. You work for Molly Chauvin. You're pals with Levi McPherson. And you're goddamn Morrison to boot. Mrs. McPherson seems to think you know something about her son. Levi and I were just friends. I'm not disagreeing, but my time in law enforcement has taught me that teens tend to see adults as the enemy and often hold back in trusting adults with vital information. Now, I'm not sure you told Detective Coleman everything you knew about Levi. No one's accusing you of anything. I have a vested interest in keeping the citizens of my county safe, and that includes you. What I don't want is to learn something 2 weeks from now that could have helped our investigation today. Lacey nodded. You're one of Father Gary's crew, aren't you? Youth group? Yeah. I attended St. Marie's. Good. Father Mac and I are old friends, and while you and I have just met, he's likely a person you can trust, correct? He's we're really close. Good. Now, he's got his principles. He's not going to blabber any confession to anyone, including me. Yet, he can also see the big picture. He knows a lot more about what's going on than an 18-year-old girl would understand, okay? So, here's what I'd like you to go do. Go talk to him. You've had a tough weekend, and he's got pretty broad shoulders to cry in, so go talk to him. Go sort things out. Go tell him what you think he needs to know. If he thinks it's important, he'll steer you in the right direction. Are we clear? She nodded again. Can I go? He nodded. Oh yeah, she knows something. Perhaps Nikki was right about her. Chapter 69. Part of the Job. Split Rock, Minnesota, June 19th, 1986. Father Gary did his duty even when he no longer believed. In God? Oh yes, he certainly still believed in God. His time in Vietnam as an army chaplain cured him of any doubt. Did he still believe in the Sani Lodge? He had his doubts. Brian Forsberg convinced him 14 years ago to become an active member in the team, but despite all their research and preparation, their plans fell to ash. The signs of a supernatural battle had been undeniable, but Gary didn't even understand the ramifications. Did he believe Levi McPherson was still alive? Unlikely. He sat between Leah McPherson and Tammy, Benjamin's girlfriend, as both struggled to articulate their grief. With Levi missing for 6 days, the young women lost their resolve and began to openly mourn Levi, even though no one knew what had happened. Levi's conservative older brothers, Benjamin and Reuben, immediately became angry, thinking their flaky brother had foolishly run away on an adventure. Then they transformed into prayer warriors, expecting God to reveal their brother as if he was a lost set of keys hiding under the couch. Now they were bitter, throwing up emotional walls to protect what was left of their shattered status quo. After Monday's press conference, Gavin grew sick with intestinal issues, and with Father bedridden, Daniel took to managing the barn duties, where he was able to hide any emotional reaction and hard work. The extended family, Gavin's uncles and cousins, spent days searching rivers and the lake, fearing an accidental drowning. As farmers, they'd seen plenty tragic deaths, and came into the house with a somber practicality after chores. With crops and livestock to tend, their support became task-oriented, like young Daniel's support. And Nicole? She worried him the most. After witnessing her slap Sheriff Forsberg during an update, Father Gary observed a performance worthy of an Oscar for Best Actress. She became a frenzied whirlwind of activity around the house, a model hostess instead of a grieving mother, and ever at her side was Joey. The 6-year-old took to sucking his thumb like a toddler, and responded to questions in only nods and shakes of his head. After investigators and child psychiatrists had a go at him, Nicole shut the operation down, cradling him in her protective bubble. A gentle knock at the door turned a dozen heads. "What's she doing here?" Reuben muttered when Lacey Morrison stepped into the doorway of the kitchen. "Is Father Gary here?" she asked. Having heard the Lacey Morrison theory muttered a dozen times in the past week, Father Gary used the arrival of another visitor to leave the living room filled with adolescents, pass through the dining room filled with adults, and step into the kitchen, which held Lacey, Nicole, and Joey. Lacey Morrison accepted Nicole's superficial hospitality and dished out equally sweet small talk. Gary paused at the edge of the kitchen to allow fences to be mended. It had been Nicole who not only opened up about the old wound, but personally threw salt in it when she offered Lacey Morrison as a person of interest to Sheriff Forsberg. The Lacey Morrison theory involves sex, drugs, and rock and roll. According to the rumor, the wild child of the senior class had latched her claws into Levi in recent months, introducing him to all sorts of hedonism. Whispers of drug dealers and kids from the wrong crowd offered an explanation beyond getting caught in a dangerous crowd. Gary, privy to countless confessions at St. Marie's and private conversations following youth group in his basement, knew the truth about Lacey Morrison. When the Asante Lodge met at the Fisher Mansion, he explained this to Forsberg, who agreed with the girl's innocence. Wally's grandson, Garrett Johnson, a straight shooter and friend of Levi from the sophomore class, also defended Lacey as only a friend. After the pleasantries were dispensed, Lacey crouched down to Joey's level. "Hey, Joey, do you remember me? I'm Levi's friend." Joey just looked down to a couple of plastic cows he was playing with. "If you I just want to let you know that if you want to be friends, I'm willing to talk about anything you want." At this, Joey looked up at Lacey. Like so many others, Lacey failed to get Joey to talk. Nicole rolled her eyes and scowled at Gary, who took the hint and began walking across the kitchen to intervene. "Thank you, Lacey. Let's give Joey some space. Let's step out on the porch to talk." Lacey rose, only to look back at Nicole. "If you've got a moment, Gary kept contact with her shoulder, and she acknowledged the hand after the brewing hostility from Mrs. McPherson. "I'm sorry, Now at his side, she retreated through the doorway and into the entryway. Before he could get her outside, she stopped and reached her hand into her back pocket, which crinkled with paper. Father Gary put an arm around her and led her outside. "Why do they hate me so much?" Lacey said once she had privacy. Tears immediately began to form in her eyes. "Why does she hate me so much?" "Because you are a Morrison with roots that go back to Bushy Bill. It gives me pause, too, even if I know you're innocent. I don't think any of them understand your friendship with Levi. Joey does. He knows. And I also think he knows what happened to Levi." Father Gary took her by both shoulders. "You're not Nancy Drew. You're not going to interrogate Joey in the McPherson kitchen. But no buts. Whatever will be, but in this crisis, we must remain composed. Now, I meant to say something to you about this a few weeks ago, but life has a way of interrupting. A friend of mine reached out about the need for..." "My God," Lacey gasped as if she'd seen a ghost. Gosh. Oh my gosh. You're talking about working at the Bible camp, aren't you?" Gary recoiled. "Yes. Did I say something to you about it in passing? I had this whole spiel worked out in my head about why you should take the job." Lacey shook her head. "What is happening here? The world's flipped upside down. I don't follow. What's got you so frightened?" She reached into her back pocket to whip out a few pages of yellow paper. "This, Levi. Everything about this place is just nuts. Gary was almost positive he hadn't said anything to Lacey about it yet, so he proceeded cautiously. The director at the camp has a job opening that's just perfect for you. I thought, I don't want to play songs at Miss Hike Island while Levi is lost out there somewhere. It'd be all backwards. I'm sorry, I can't. I've got to go figure something out. She jogged away from him back to her car, leaving him a bit stunned. She knew about the job? How? What has her so upset? He jogged up to her car as she was backing up. He stood at her window, which she rolled down. How did you know I was going to ask you about the job? I read about it in Hamlet's Ghost, she snapped and let her foot off the brake. At the end of the driveway, she didn't turn back to town. Instead, she turned to Old Copper Road.